So there have been a couple of comments on the channel in the last couple of weeks about USB power. And now, I'll come clean, I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'm not a great fan of devices that are purely USB powered. And my groundings are to do with the way that USB works. Okay, that's where my personal views come from. They are my views, they're not anybody else's views, but they're my views. I don't like devices that can only be powered by USB or batteries for two reasons. Number one, you run out of USB power. Number two, the batteries run flat and you spend a fortune on them. I'd rather have a device where I have the option to put a 9 volt, 5 volt, whatever it happens to be, supply into them. But it seems to be a number of people say, get over it, sort it out. So I'm going to actually try and explain why I have an issue with USB powered devices. I don't have an issue with the device per se, because I have bitten the bullet and gone and bought some boutique devices. But I just have an issue with the concept. And I'm going to try and do it in a really visual way. This might work, this might fail spectacularly, but we'll see. Now I don't know how this is going to work, but we'll see. And also, I don't possess a USB MIDI keyboard. I present MIDI keyboards, but they're much larger than the table, so I'm not going to put them there. So I hope you will forgive my very crude rendition of a MIDI keyboard. Right, so this is what we're going to call USB Powergernomics. Okay, I have a number of devices laid out in front of me which I want to connect to my Mac using USB. I'm going to power the whole lot USB. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect my MIDI keyboard to the USB track. Now, for the sake of argument, we're going to say that this MIDI keyboard is a Roland A800. Okay, hopefully that's coming across. Wonderful. Right, and I happen to know that a Roland A800 requires 300 milliamps at 5 volts. Okay, so that's what power the Roland A800 needs to power it up. So then we're going to move on to the Roland D005, which is the synthesizer I'm going to use today. And I happen to know that this requires 500 milliamps at 5 volts. I'm going to use my TR-08 as my rhythm composer, and I also know that that requires 500 milliamps at 5 volts. So I've got my sound source sorted, I've got my controller sorted, I've got my rhythm composer sorted. So now I need some way of getting microphones and micro vocals, guitars, or anything else I have into my setup. Now I've put here a Scarlett 1816i. Okay, I wouldn't use this in a mobile setup. Okay, it just so happens that's the one I use in my studio at the moment, and therefore I took it out of my studio to give you a visual representation. But let's say we didn't use the Scarlett, I'm just using the Scarlett as a placeholder. Let's say we used something like the Roland Go Mixer. Alright, so let's say this is the Roland Go Mixer. Okay, and I know that the Roland Go Mixer requires 40 milliamps at 5 volts. Now I'm just going to move this back a bit, give me a little bit more space. So now I've got to plug these into my Mac. So my MacBook Pro, which is what is on the table, which is what I use, has two MIDI interfaces plus a Thunderbolt interface, or a MIDI-C interface. Okay, those USB interfaces have the capability, so we're going to say there's one interface on this side, which is exactly what it is, and there's one interface on this side, and both of those have a capacity of 900 milliamps at 5 volt, and I have another 900 milliamps at 5 volts there. Okay, so now we start doing some maths, which I know musicians hate doing maths, but this is where you have to start thinking about this. So I want to connect my devices there. Now, if I were to take simple maths here, 500 plus 500 gives me 1000 milliamps. I don't have an interface on my Mac that will take 1000 milliamps. So what I'm going to have to do is think a bit smarter. So what I'm going to do here is say, onto the left hand channel I'm going to plug in my rhythm composer, and I'm also going to plug in my keyboard. So that gives us on the left hand channel 500 milliamps plus 300 milliamps, which is 800 milliamps. Hopefully that's coming across. So I've got 100 milliamps to spare on my left hand USB port. Now, looking around here, I could plug my Go mixer into there as well, but then I won't be able to plug my D05 into there. So what I'm going to do in that instance is I'm going to say, right, I'm going to take my D05 and I'm going to plug that into my second interface, and I'm also going to plug my Go mixer into my second interface. So on my second interface I've got 500 milliamps plus 40 milliamps, which gives me 540 milliamps and about 360 milliamps of headroom, so I could put another device in. Now I'm quite lucky because Mac put 900 milliamps on their interfaces. Okay, quite a lot of manufacturers, a standard USB configuration is not 900 milliamps. It is actually considerably less. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub all this out, and I'm going to start again assuming this was a different computer with the industry standard milliampage on it. Okay, so I've rubbed this out. So industry standard on a lot of USB interfaces is 1, 2, let's say you got 3 on this computer, because most other computers have more than 2. But industry standard is 500 milliamps at 5 volts. So we've got 500 milliamps, 500 milliamps, and 500 milliamps at 5 volts. So I've got 3 interfaces, all capable of taking 500 milliamps. So let's start again. So I want my keyboard to be plugged in. Okay, so I'm going to take my keyboard and I'm going to plug this into this port. I'm also going to plug my Go mixer into that port, which gives me 300 milliamps plus 40 milliamps, or 340 milliamps. So I've just got about 160 spare on that port. I'm now going to plug my DO5 into that one, which is 500 milliamps. So that port is completely used up. I'm now going to plug my DO5 TR08 into the last one, and again that takes 500 milliamps, so that port is completely used. Right, I can't use anything more in my setup. That's it. Okay, so if I wanted to put another module on, or I wanted to run something with a phantom power supply, I couldn't do it. I also can't add anything else to here, like a MIDI controller or anything like that. So that's it. My setup is done out. This is what I was trying to get across when I'm talking about powergernomics on USB ports. You very, very quickly run out of USB power from the computer. Now, if I was to say I'm not going to use a Go mixer, and I actually use a Go mixer, if I'm brutally honest, for recording these videos. But if I was to say I'm not going to use a Go mixer, I'm going to actually go up to something like a Scarlett. So let's take that out, and let's put a Scarlett Solo in there. Okay, so I can tell you that this is a USB only interface, which takes a minimum of 250 milliamps at 5 volts. Okay, now if I was to continue to run this same setup, I've got a problem, because where originally I was using 300 plus 40, I'm now using 300 milliamps plus 250 milliamps, which gives me 550 milliamps, which actually is overloading the port. I've got a problem. I can't use that interface. Something will go wrong. Now, likelihood is your computer will try and supply the required voltage to the devices, and the USB port will fail. Or probably what will happen on the other side is the computer will carry on supplying 500 milliamps, and one of these devices, either that one or that one, will not work correctly. It won't have enough oomph in it to make it work correctly. Now what typically will happen, and somebody will probably correct me because I'll get this wrong, is the voltage will drop slightly because you're trying to draw too much current. And therefore the voltage is, when that sort of scenario happens, the voltage tends to become unstable a little bit. And if that was to happen, then you would probably find that this and this won't work correctly. Now, I can solve this, and I'm going to redraw the diagram, but there are some issues. Right, so what I've now done is I've now added a new component to the diagram. And what I've added is this, which is a powered USB hub. So this thing can take 10 USB devices, and it can also power USB devices. And this can power USB devices to the tune of 3,500 milliamps. Okay, so I can put far more devices on. So, redrawing the diagram, I can put my USB keyboard to it. I can put my Roland DO5 to it. I can put my TR08 to it. Now, I probably wouldn't put the USB audio device to it because I don't want latency. So I would probably put that directly into my Mac, and therefore I would have a load of this of 250 milliamps. Now, there will be a load on this port from this device, okay, and I can't tell you what it is because I don't know, but it will be considerably less than 900 milliamps because the power for these devices is all being supplied by the hub. So therefore we probably have 100 milliamps on there. So I've got plenty of headroom at the moment. So you think, you're sitting there thinking, right, he's solved it. Ah, I have and I haven't. So yes, this does solve the problem, and funny enough, this is exactly how I run my studio. I have a number of these sitting in the path between something and the Mac to give me the power. The downside to having one of these devices is that I need to go off to a socket and plug it in. It needs its own power. So in one way, yes, I have solved it, because I now only need to plug two things in, as in I plug my Mac in and I plug the hub in, but I still don't like the idea of not being able to plug something into one of these devices. Okay. Hopefully that explains USB Powergernomics. I'm hoping it does anyway. And the reason why I'm not a fan of it, I would prefer to have, and this has an independent power supply, my Focus. Everything else in the studio, apart from the boutiques, have independent power supply. So I'm not relying on the power supply from this thing. Anyway, hope that helps. So this is the point in the video where I turn around to you and say, if you enjoyed the contents of this video, please give it a thumbs up. It allows other people to find this content more easily that you have enjoyed. I'm sure by now, if you didn't like the content of the video, you've probably given me a thumbs down, but I'd prefer if you didn't. If you'd like to be notified about when I post additional content to this channel, somewhere about here should be the subscription icon. So please click on there and subscribe to the channel. Over here should be other content that you may enjoy that I've already done or posted to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again.